Jordan here from the Classical Guitar Society. I'm here with Jason Vieaux, a household name in the classical guitar world. Jason will be the opening concert on April 22nd for the Classical Guitar Society's annual Classical Guitar Festival, which takes place April 22nd to the 23rd. You can register for that in person or online at phillyguitar.org. Jason, how are you?
I'm good, Jordan. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. I guess I would start with a question about how you were introduced to the classical guitar, or, what kind do you play? But I think those bases are well covered by now. Instead, could we talk about some peripherals? In case the audience hasn't noticed, classical music hasn't really been on the Billboard charts since probably the disco era. So studying that type of music at a young age that isn't in vogue is sort of a difficult thing, especially for you since you grew up in Buffalo. How did you handle practicing guitar as opposed to, say, playing hockey or being on a team? What kept you engaged?
Well, I also your reference to the disco era. I think even in that case, a fifth of Beethoven by Walter. I forget his name. The arranger. That had a good beat to it. I was 5 when that came out. That was all that stuff from Saturday Night Fever, Night on Disco Mountain. Yeah. So that wasn't really exactly it wasn't. It was classic music, but with a disco beat to it. Those are good tracks. Anyway, how did I? Well, I think the thing. I grew up in a pretty blue collar household in that sense, and so we watched sports and stuff regularly, and I played I played organized soccer for a little while, but I was pretty careful with my hands actually already by the time 11, 12, 13, after starting at around 7 or 8. So I was pretty conscientious about that sort of thing. So I was careful about, say, trying out for, say, the football team or playing intramural hockey and this sort of thing. I was actually most kids were, until my first growth spurt, were bigger than me. They sort of hit their initial growth spurts, I think, before I did. So I think also that played into it as well. And again, by the time I was 10 or 11, I was very much into it on my own. It was just something that, it was something that my parents noticed. I think that I really, really enjoyed and took to. I wouldn't say that I wouldn't, you hear about these kind of stories of some rock guitarists or jazz guitarists that would practice in their room for 10 hours a day. I wasn't exactly that kind of kid. I did what I did in my 10-year-old brain that I felt would fulfill my obligations to the lesson material, lesson assignments from my first teacher, Jeremy Sparks. But I think the whole thing of it, was something I think by 10 or 11, I think for someone that age, I was fairly serious about. And it really was sort of my thing. It wasn't something that came from my parents in that sense. They just supported it. They got, offered a lot of moral support for it.
Yeah, I guess when you're in the study, it sounded like you took more of like what we would think as like an eating the elephant approach, where you're meeting the criteria for each week. Hey, practice this. Yeah. And you were interested enough that you did that. You didn't. Yes. I think when we think of maybe like a Segovia or a Williams, that they were born and bred, like you were saying, 10 and 11, they're practicing 10 and 11 hours a day, and their end goal is to win this, contest, or they have some end goal in mind. It just sounded like you did it out of pure joy or love of the craft there.
Yeah, I would say that's basically as much as I suppose a 10-year-old, could do at that point. Really. So, yeah.
Yeah, interesting there. So, Well, transition here to a little bit of genre, and it's in the same vein of studying and what you're indoctrinated into. So I started out with jazz guitar, and I studied with John Sheridan, and then the late Philly great Tom Giacobetti, who had transcribed many, if not the whole catalog of Pat Metheny's works. So I was indoctrinated and found a love in his music there. So
Wow.
it's obviously it's obvious that you're a Pat disciple, and you've recently been featured on Pat's work for Paths of Light on the album Road to the Sun. So I guess one, I want your base impressions there. Do you think he transcends what we think as a fixed genre? And two, how do you even approach his work?
Well, I would say so. I would say he probably does. I think what I guess if he only did the very popular Pat Metheny group, perhaps not so, because if he kind of put all his eggs in that basket, but I think there could definitely is an argument that he transcends anything. He transcends the word jazz, right? Just because of all the collaborations and also what he's able to do as a composer. Uh, um, and yeah, I feel like when you really get into the whole body of work, it's something where he's a rare kind of artist, I think, in that sense, where he belongs to it and he belongs to the tradition. And if you know the history of improvisers of any instrument before him, he very much, there's a respect and a knowledge of the tradition that comes before him, but then very, very much an individual voice, not only through his guitar playing guitar sounds, the sounds and such, and improvisation that he brings to the table as an improviser. But I would say just through the tunes, like the songbook essentially is really, I mean, it's huge. And
Yeah.
it's when I started to feel that, more acutely in this, as someone like of the X generation, was when I would go to, say, New York, to the clubs there, and like the millennials 15 years ago were playing a lot of his tunes, or they had a very heavy influence, whether it would be on guitar or trumpet or saxophone, that kind of thing. You could sort of feel there was definitely like an influence on certain players. So.
Yeah, and I guess for how did you approach his work there? I mean, how do you even begin to digest Pat Metheny's voice for classical guitar?
Oh, do you mean the transcriptions I did in years ago, or do you mean the solo piece that he wrote for me?
The solo piece that he wrote, but
Oh, yeah,
we
the
can talk
solo
about the
piece.
transcriptions too.
Well, yeah.
I'm game for anything.
Well, I mean, those are fairly easy answers. I mean, I just like the arrangements or transcriptions. Those were just fun for me. I had never intended. I never had the idea to make an album when I was in college doing them. I just started discovering all these great, tunes, and like I would with any rock or pop tune or other jazz standard, I just start picking it out. There's a story that Michael Chapdelaine tells of, like, I was sitting at his kitchen table playing Abbey Road. Now, I don't remember that. I think it was probably more something like he would, we would be talking about the Beatles, and I probably had a guitar in my hand, and then I probably just kind of banged out a quick, like, kind of thing with a bass and melody and maybe some harmony things in between. So I was able to do that I had already done enough transcribing and then little bits of arranging and stuff on my own that the lead time, or the how do you say, what do you say, the lag time between someone mentioning something and then me playing it, a recognizable version, like a real slapdash thing on the spot, that decreases as you do it more. And there was never any goal with it. It was just fun for me, and I was goofing around doing things like that from the time I started practicing classical guitar. As soon as my hands could do it, and the things, my ear already heard it. So the translation was more or less of wherever level my guitar playing was at the time. In the case of the piece of Four Paths of Light, that I would approach as I would anything from a living composer or our composer, or like Albanese or Ponce. Just I do a lot of listening, of course, and in Pat's case, I mean, I listened to an awful lot of it, so I think there was no translation, I feel like, in terms of the style or what the music should sound like. And also we had talked a lot about, what the format, the four movements would sound like and how they would be different from each other in character, and how the thing would, of course, have this kind of thematic thread and overall narrative arc and that kind of thing, which he's so good at, in so many instances. And so it was pretty, again, it was kind of like you just dive right in. You already kind of know not what the music specifically sounds like, but as you start playing it through, you go, okay, all right, this is gonna sound like this. It's the same way you would if you listened to enough, Targa or whatever, or Leo Brouwer, right? I mean, if you've studied enough Leo Brouwer pieces and worked on them enough, and or read them or listened to them, you kind of have a good idea of what you have a good sense of what the music's supposed to sound like. It's like that. That's probably a good example, actually. A good parallel would be Brouwer.
Great. Now, with the transcriptions, do you do any orchestral reductions added to that?
No. Oh,
No.
There's no time. I mean, that's the whole thing. It's like there's just no time. The fact that I even did them is kind of amazing to me, looking back on it, and actually making a record. Actually, making the record made sense in hindsight, because then you put the energy that went into doing it, which didn't feel like work at all, and then you sort of fine-tune them to make a record. And then, so in other words, the work that you put into it actually kind of bears some kind of like material fruit in the form of a recording, a commercial album or something, So yeah.
So you mentioned Ponce, and I'm a huge fan of Ponce. I wrote my thesis with Dr. Jorge Barón Corvera of UNAM. But any chance I get to talk about him and his works, I take. So go on a little rant about that. So your album from 2002, it remains one of my favorite interpretations of those very important sonatas.
Oh, thank you.
So yeah, and when listening to that, I just think Ponce's catalog is so dense, and it's not only dense, it's complex. And often when we're talking about Ponce as opposed to, say, Villa-Lobos, they're two different animals. But when we talk about Ponce, you often hear it doesn't fit in the hand as well, maybe because he's writing on the piano.
Right.
But how do you go about tackling that without your hand falling off or having to go to physical therapy?
Right.
What's your process there?
Yeah, I'm thinking, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of, in particular, fourth movement of Classica, first movement of Sonata 3, right? And maybe to a slightly lesser extent, but certainly, the fourth movement of Romantica. And also the way I voiced with my fingerings, the first movement of Romantica and third, well, actually all of it, and was very much an effort to, because at that time there wasn't a lot available, to me at the time, to try to find manuscripts and such. I tried to find from colleagues and that kind of thing, but it was pretty scant what I received. It would have been great to have, say, like Tillman Hofstock's critical edition, right? And that's the newer one, the more recent for Schott, to have at my disposal, because that provides almost like an open kind of a platform whereby the one who's studying can kind of make their choices.
Yeah.
Whereas I did that kind of just on instinct, right? And so if I had to do the recording again, I might do a few things differently, but not all that much. I think the thing about guitar, about playing it, if you the hard thing about Ponce is that if you know what should be happening with voice leading and polyphony, it then makes the job that much harder. Like it's already hard to play, but if you're trying to just go beyond, say, an editor's fingerings of the first editions and stuff and such like that, it's there's a lot of choices and such to be made, and a lot of different directions you can go in. When I approach it with students, is just I give them, like I do with anything, I give them options for fingerings, according to their ability level at the time. And sometimes you can say like, well, I do this, and they go, wow, I say, that's what I do. Like it's a little twisty in the left hand, or you have to do this thing with the right hand to get the polyphony comes out really great that way. Sometimes, saying like hypothetically, a student might say, well, oh wow, that seems really hard. I can't, so just, try it for 2 weeks, right? You try these 2 fingerings and then see, because you can surprise yourself, right? Something that seems like a little difficult at the time, you can actually do in a couple weeks if you work at it. But yeah, it's definitely not like Villa-Lobos or Brouwer. Like Villa-Lobos was a really good guitar player. Like he could really play those things. So those are all very sensible fingerings, of course.
Absolutely.
And because it's written for the guitar by a guitarist and very idiomatic, you don't have to really question the polyphony. Like it's kind of written to do what the guitar does well, and it makes the guitar sound really big. Sort of like Brouwer, like without anything that's overly, like Brouwer's most difficult music is of course very difficult, but it's still also crucially very idiomatic. Like he's not asking you to do anything that can't be done. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just think, not to really harp on the subject, but yeah, the voice leading is huge in Ponce. The third sonata, the slow movement, just the little tidbits of the bass voice that comes up, do 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 do, and just having the voice leading and really picking out the color, what you're going to use. I mean, it's he's writing at the piano, but he's actually writing for an orchestra, and now we're trying to reduce it to a guitar.
That's right. Yep. But that's the right way to approach. That's exactly the right way to approach his music, for sure, is from an orchestral perspective. That's all I like when I hear any of those pieces. Like you can tell it's just that's definitely what he's got in mind for sure.
Yeah, or the preludes. It might as well be for an orchestra. It might as well be like Carnival of Animals, just little short incipits or scenes from a.
Yes.
It's interesting. So when can we look forward to your preludes? Your Ponce preludes.
Wow. That would be a fun project to do, actually. How long are those all in total? Do you know?
I believe around 23 minutes.
That's it.
He has some short.
Some of them are really they're quite short, aren't they?
Yeah. So, but beautiful. But starting out, is the juice worth a squeeze? I would say so.
I'd want to pad that record with. I would pad that record with some of the really wonderful shorter pieces like valse, the valse in D major and things like that.
Yeah. Or have you approached the Folia yet? I know you touched that, but maybe not. Really.
Yeah, no, I read it, of course, in college and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, maybe someday. Yeah, you're a big Ponce fan, so I mean that's I can understand. Yeah. That's like the big masterwork, I think, for the guitar for sure.
Yeah, that was my whole thesis, is orchestration and what instrument represents what in the Folia. So
nice.
Yeah. So love it. Can't get enough. So I guess on that note of practicing tough pieces and all that good stuff. So I remember in a master class that you hosted, I took part in it, but you considered yourself, and I quote you, maniacal in your practice. So when you consider your life as a whole, all the facets in it, so you teach at Curtis and the Cleveland Institute of Music, you perform all over the world, you record, you win Grammys, and most importantly, you help raise a family. So how do you find time to balance it all, and what does your schedule even look like?
Well, I mean, the balance really comes with getting enough sleep is really important. I managed to, like, after dinner, I'm home for 2 days today. So right before our interview, I took my kids to school, then drove here for our interview. Yesterday, when I'm home, I try to do the lunches, make the lunches, do breakfast, take them to school, pick them up, extracurriculars on the days that I'm home. So there is not a lot of time. I mean, if I get 3 hours of practice in a day, that's a really good amount. Like, that's a good day. So when I guess, and I have used that word maniacal, but when I'm saying maniacal is not in relation to the amount of time, but to the time organization. I think one of the best things I help students with as a teacher is actually organizing, prioritization, and time organization. Like, those two things really married together. Like, you have to understand when you practice something to, like, I can't waste any time. Like, I just don't have time to waste. If I like if there's a gap or something between lessons and there's a half an hour, I've got to really get 20 minutes. If I choose to practice and I add that 20 minutes, I've got to really get something done. And my brain I've sort of trained it over 30 years now to know exactly what I can get, like you say, like squeezing juice out of the, thing to get all the nutrients out of that 20 minutes that I can. So, I mean, I could tell you, like, from this weekend, exactly like the priority list and even within each movement of what I would do in 20 minutes. If I only had 20 minutes, I would hit these 10 different spots, type of thing.
Great. Yeah. Very interesting.
So it's all depending on the time that you've got. But then the overall time organization thing, it's important to allow enough time where you feel like you can do a really strong performance every time out. And that's a challenge. Yeah, for sure. But
so it sounds quality over quantity there.
For sure. Yeah. That's what all the professionals are really doing. I mean, they don't have, if you're playing that much, if you're playing anything over 20, I think 25 gigs a year, I mean, unless you're playing like one program, I mean, I think once you're playing one, if you're doing that, I mean, that was like the GFA tour for me. I mean, if after a while I got to, I mean, after 20 of those gigs in quick succession, I mean, you don't really have to practice that much. I mean, one should be using their practice time to learn other repertoire, right? So, but if you're playing, like 5, 6, 7 hours of music or more every year, like that's a daily update. Like, that's a daily refresh on the time organization thing.
Yeah. So I guess I'm going a little bit off the script here. So how are you choosing your next endeavor on what you're going to practice, what you want to potentially perform?
Well, this Saturday, of course, is my primary focus, as it can be, because actually my recital with Sasha Cook, my initial recitals with Tim McAllister, saxophone, that was last week, right? So what's nice about this week is I don't actually have to really focus that much on anything except this recital. Then the following weekend, is that right? Following weekend, or is it maybe 2 weekends after? I'm in Salt Lake City now. I just played there 2 years ago, so I have to have, my obligation is to have an entirely different program.
Yeah.
So I'm going to be bringing back some pieces that I haven't played in a long time, but that I'm also very familiar with for them. But I also know from experience that I don't have to start practicing for that until, say, Monday morning. Right. Sunday I'll be busy. Yeah. Sunday I'll be busy. I'm judging the competition final and doing a master class, and then I run to the airport from there. And then, that's my, that we're going to just chill the rest of the day on the plane and put the kids to bed when I get home, and that's it. But so it's literally a day-to-day thing. Most of my tough kind of things, stretches of like heavy repertoire month or heavy repertoire for 2 weeks, like the Bodorova Concerto was a totally first time for me Sylvie Bodorova guitar and bass, double bass concerto, and that was March. Then I had a program with for chamber music series in West Virginia that I had, like, you can just see it. You can, after a while, you have the wherewithal and the experience to go, this program is going to take 40 minutes in rotation, like rotating certain things on a 2-day rotation, 3-day rotation across a month. I can get all that done in 40 minutes. So I'm a big fan of, my students are probably tired of hearing me say this, of early and often, early and often, early and often. Like, I think the if you start early enough before your target date, of when the performance is, and you don't cram. Like, I hate cramming. Like, that's the worst feeling to me. I know, because I've had to do it before.
Yeah.
Something like out of my control. In some cases professionally, like, it's not in your control.
Yeah.
So if you start back early enough, you can actually do several programs, like 3 hours of music or more, even across a 2-month period, if you're really organized about the duration and you have a good sense of, well, it's going to take me this amount of time. And then you reevaluate again, like I said, every week you reevaluate. Well, one's a little tougher than I thought, so you add time. Or, you know what, this is coming along a lot quicker than I thought it would, so then you reduce the time, and so on and so forth. And you just refresh, reevaluate, and refresh, from week to week, roughly, that type of thing.
So you're really taking the data into play here, and really making the most out of your practice time, is what I'm hearing.
Yeah, and you can do all that stuff on planes, basically.
I'll have to travel by plane more.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That's the nice thing about flying, is actually you're stuck there, so you can do a lot of that. You could do that planning or emails, and get some of those emails down, and this type of thing, or the administrative work for conservatory, in terms of, like, say, like grading, portals and stuff like that, all that.
Yeah, it's definitely free time.
Yeah.
Just how you spend it is another story.
Yeah.
So no in-flight movies then.
No, not so much. No. I'd actually rather watch a ESPN crawl, like, without headphones, just silent. I mean, I've watched a lot of movies on airplanes with no sound. Which is
I always do the flight tracker. It's like watching paint dry, but still, yeah.
Yep.
But,
I like that. Yep.
But okay, so pivoting now, it always comes back to Bach. So this is a rabbit hole. There are several options, and spend as much time as you like on whatever, and as little time on the other. So I guess put it out there. There are several recordings and transcriptions of Bach. Limitless, endless, and you can hear it on any medium, from harpsichord to someone's recorder to someone playing it on the metal copper pipes. So you've added to the pile by having recently released your Bach Volume 2 album. So hopefully I'm not phrasing this question to slight you or anything, but why do you feel it was necessary for you to record your take or interpretation on not one, but 2 full Bach albums?
Yeah, no, it's never necessary for me to make an album at all, especially since you can't really make any money from them for yourself if you're playing, someone else's music that they wrote, right? It's because of course the way that the way that people listen to music, consume music now through streaming services. So it's just more or less like, boy, it'd be a shame. It's almost like, well, it'd be a shame not to make this record, because because the first violin sonata, for example, was like in my repertoire for a long time. But also there was a lot of emails over the years after the 2009 Lute Works record. There was a lot of email from fans of classical guitar and Bach's music of when are you going to do another one? But also we titled it Volume 1, which is because the first one we did all the lute stuff except for, say, the 999 Prelude and the Fourth Lute Suite. So the whole time, the goal the whole time, we, of course, not knowing what was going to happen after that, right? The goal the whole time was to then have a second volume whereby it would be a violin record, and thus with like the Fourth Lute Suite that would complete the four lute suites, you know, through the two albums. And of course, the Fourth Lute Suite is also is the third partita, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you could, we just call it Violin Works, done. That was the plan back in 2009. It was like all that, you know, was just that we'll do it that way. And then I might do one where we do more violin stuff for cello in the future. I mean, it's not that necessarily that recording is needed by the musical universe. It's just that, it's the best music that we play. I mean, it's like you can make an argument that Bach is the greatest, you know, composer of Western classical music ever. I mean, still, even after everything that's happened after him. I mean, it's the best stuff that we can play on our instrument that is convincing on our instrument, right?
Mm-hmm.
I personally don't, this is a personal thing. I applaud guitarists playing Beethoven and such on the guitar. I just personally, I don't, for me, it doesn't sound, it's not my cup of tea in terms as a guitar transcription. Right.
Yeah.
Whereas Bach, like, it fits terrifically on it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Sounds terrific on it to my ear.
Yeah, I guess before we go down the rabbit hole, there are 2 points that you made that I want to sort of harp on there. One, you know, that your audience or your listeners sort of demanded it of you to have a Bach Part 2. Is it unfair to say it's almost like that's how we gauge our favorite artists on? It's almost like seeing Sir Ian McKellen in a Shakespeare play as opposed to how David Tennant will be performing a Shakespeare play. You know, we have Shakespeare's whole oeuvre, and we want to see the different players and how they're going to use it, how they're going to act in it.
Right.
And you know, the same goes for, we want to hear your voice when it comes to Bach and the decisions you're going to make. You know, there are several threads going everywhere. There's a lot of meat to Bach, and what are you going to do? So,
and also Bach's music, like Shakespeare, takes on, it's endlessly you can endlessly refresh it in your current modern time. Like it's not, the music is never stale. Like you say, you can play it on anything and it's going to sound like Bach, and you know, it may not be as convincing on every single instrument, you know, a particular piece of music, but it's I think it's like that with Shakespeare. You see some very modern, you know, very cutting edge production with Shakespeare in order to modernize it, in order to take the same content, but the content of those of Shakespeare, of course, is endlessly relatable to any generation, which is why people are still doing it. If it wasn't, people wouldn't really be doing it. That's the deep level of artistry that's contained in that body of work, and that's the same. I would say that's very similar to Bach. It's endless. It's timeless music.
Yeah, I guess the second tangent, you had mentioned playing Beethoven as opposed to Bach on guitar, and that's something that I've been struggling with. I share the sentiment, and again, I'm no one, and whatever. If you hear Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata on guitar and gives you the warm and fuzzies, awesome.
Great.
But I feel like it doesn't hold that same gravity. Same with like Claire de Lune. So on that same note, I feel like there's music that really translates well to guitar. Albani's never touched a guitar, you know, wrote for guitar in his life.
Terrific.
All piano, but it might be fair to say he had the guitar in mind when he was writing those pieces, even though it wasn't for guitar.
They sound like, it sounds like the music sounds like they were written for guitar. Music lovers, you know, people that love music are often, you know, every once in a while people I love, you know, I think the classical music audience is a lot more educated about Albanese now than I think maybe some time ago. But you couldn't fault you almost couldn't fault somebody for thinking that those are guitar pieces written by a Spanish guitarist. They sound like they're written for the guitar. They're so at home on it. Granados too, you know. So
Yeah. Okay. So I guess the final topic I want to approach, you made an allusion to it. So you recorded an album recently with Anna Kiko Myers, fabulous violinist, and a terrific album. You know, despite being a virtuosic solo artist as you are, you've played in several chamber ensembles. You know, the Piazzolla album being one of my personal favorites. So, what compels you to participate in these ensembles?
It's just fun, and it's really kind of like there's something just about chamber music and all of its facets, I guess, and all of its combinations. Like you really, as a musician, I mean, there's really no substitute really for that. It's if you're only playing solo recital, which of course I love equally. I mean, there's nothing like giving solo recitals. I mean, that's when the entire orchestra is kind of in your hands and in your ear, and you're projecting all those things that you're hearing through the guitar. But there's an antenna that develops through playing chamber music when you're young. And I just jumped in all the time I'm sitting in a studio here right now where I teach at Cleveland Institute of Music, and I was here, you know, gosh, it's hard to believe, 31 years ago as a freshman, and I dove right into all that stuff with my colleagues. I was in a guitar quartet as well, which I very much enjoyed, but I would play in. Someone in my class, I think it was either our freshman year or sophomore year, he wanted to write a trio for viola, guitar, and I believe it was a wind instrument like flute, asked if I would be on the recital and that sort of thing. I mean, I loved those kind of things. I played all blues for a tuba recital. I brought my jazz box that I still have and did that, and took a solo over the changes and comped the rest. I was actually kind of like a quasi-functioning mediocre jazz guitarist in the late 90s before my professional career as a classical musician really started taking off. And I remember doing First Circle by Pat Metheny with a percussion ensemble for a master's student's, his second master recital. He's like, he had known, he, like a lot of percussionists were big fans of that music too. And he said, would you, he's like, I hear you love Pat's stuff. Would you want to do First Circle? I was like, oh my God, yeah. I'd like to play the acoustic guitar part all the way through. Of course, like when is it? I'll block anything out for that. So I jumped into all kinds of things, traditional and modern, all through my years at CIM. And what I didn't realize at the time is that it was just making me a much better musician. And on every level, like listening, stylistically, like you learn so much more about stylistic, like playing Paganini from violinists, like from string players, than you could ever really learn really from just playing the guitar stuff. So so that experience actually comes back around indirectly into your solo playing, and I think it makes it much richer. You're much richer for it. It's not these separate things like concerto and chamber and solo. They all just kind of go into the mix after a while. It's wonderful.
Absolutely, and so echoing or going back to the Anna Kiko Myers album, I noticed you play Bachiano Brasileiras, Villa-Lobos, and you played that in an album from the early aughts, I believe, with a cellist, and it was totally different. It was faster. You used different colors and timbres. And mainly the introduction, you played Ponticello for the first phrase, and then
right. That's right.
Yeah.
And I also recorded it with Gary Shocker in 2002. I think the cellist you're referring to was for an EMI record, Young Song. Yeah, so I've actually recorded 3 times. So I think where you're going with this is like you're playing it, you're making different decisions at each time, and that is exactly what I'm talking about. My job, to a large extent, with something like that, especially with a singer like someone like Sasha Cook, like a Grammy-winning mezzo soprano, sung with the Met, like a favorite of San Francisco Opera and Michael Tilson Thomas for years, and all over the world. Like she just, I mean, people think I travel a lot. I that it's like I travel like 2/3 of the year. I mean, it's amazing. When I see people like that, my colleagues like that are going around and around and around and around. But she is just a total like she can just eat music like one thing after another. Every week she's doing something completely different in an opera here, that John Adams opera the next 2 weeks, and then over here, and then she's singing like Beethoven 9 with an orchestra or whatever. I mean, it's incredible. So, but when you're in recital with someone like that, as just as an example, your primary job is actually to accompany. That's a beautiful thing. Is like actually the guitar accompany in the accompaniment role, again, almost like this little orchestra behind a soloist like Anakiko and this kind of thing. So it is very much a collaborative effort. That's the collaborative pianist's job, right? When someone like we had the great we've had so many great teachers here at Cleveland Institute of Music and coaches from all over the world for that kind of thing with singers, and you understand after a while that it's like that your primary job is to support them, like you're trying to facilitate them for them to be their best, right? So a lot of those musical details are very much a collaboration effort. So yeah, that's interesting, because I don't really listen to the records once they're done very much at all. I mean, sometimes the solo ones I do if I want to kind of analyze something, but the collaborative things in chamber music is very much like it's much more fluid, and then you don't, and I find that I don't second guess too much of that kind of stuff too much. It's happening in the moment, as chamber music is very much an in the moment type of thing, and you just hope that you capture something really nice on record.
Yeah, and not to go on too long, I know we're at a hard stop here, but yeah, it also sounds like your voice, we hear you not aging, but not maturing either, but different considerations and artistic decisions you're making. If you re-recorded your Ponce album from 2002, I'm sure we would hear a ton of differences, but still, it's Jason Vieaux.
I think we would hear different tempos as well.
Yeah,
for sure. Just on that alone,
Yeah, just like listening to Pat Martino early versus later, or Ella Fitzgerald. Cool. Lastly, what's on your horizon? What can we, mostly me, look forward to from you in the future?
Well, actually, the next recording is most likely to be another solo album. I feel like I've done a lot of these collaboration records. There was a very specific professional reason for that. And there are windows that are sort of closing. And then when I won the Grammy, it sort of felt right to get to really now, okay, let's do these now. Let's commit to some time where we can be in the same city with Alan Bice and Azika Records and this kind of thing to record these things. Now I'm actually kind of looking forward to more doing solo things, because we have a little bit more time. It's not as difficult to schedule. And Azika wants, and furthermore, Azika Records would liked very much of all of I had 4 or 5 ideas for solo records, and the one that they very much liked is my one where I just do my arrangements. I record my arrangement, the like What a Wonderful World. I recently did one of Pure Imagination from Willy Wonka, and as a request from a friend and such, and all those things, and a lot of the music that I wrote over the pandemic, actually, when there wasn't any concerts for a while, I wrote like 60, 70 minutes of music. And I'm playing one of those things in the concerts now called Home. and just to make a nice, kind of record that is stuff which is very much kind of centered around how I work as a musician in non-traditional material through the guitar, which is nice, I think.
Yeah, awesome. Looking forward to it. And again, thank you, Jason, for your time, the wonderful insights, and the great chat. We look forward to hosting you at our annual Philadelphia Classical Guitar Festival. Again, that's April 22nd. It's the concert, and the festival itself runs till the 23rd. So that on the 22nd, that's going to be at the Philadelphia Episcopal Cathedral. Please check out all of Jason's works, all of them. And you can register for an in-person as well as online viewing of the performance on phillyguitar.org. Thank you again.
All right. Thanks, Jordan. Bye.